Welcome to I Got Stuck, a catalog of temporary obsessions, with me, your host, Dr. Kelly Reedy, where in each episode I'll give you a full report on the latest topic that's kept me up at night. Things that have led to countless hours of procrastination through Googling, asking Jeeves, and navigating the twistiest and turniest of internet rabbit holes. Oh, and speaking of rabbits, what do you call 5 snowshoe hares bouncing backwards in the snow? A receding hairline. There's another similarly hilarious joke at the very, very end of this episode, so stick around till then for more of that. Also, I should announce that this is the last episode of the first season of I Got Stuck. It was a long time coming, and once it's out, I'll spend a little time working on a whole new batch of episodes, which I plan to release in the spring. And now for today's wintry topic. Ice yachting aficionado Franklin Delano Roosevelt once said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." In addition to fear itself, I'm also afraid of ice skating, skiing, and really anything that involves moving too fast on ice or snow. In this episode, I want to take you on a mini tour of some highlights of the history of winter sports. Things that I, as a Southerner, generally do not participate in. Just to be clear, though, I love snow so much, even after living in Northeast Ohio and shoveling a whole driveway for 7 years. I also love the Cleveland Browns. I always say that being a Browns fan is the most fun because you can celebrate if they just run in the right direction. Okay, I'll start with ice skating. Historians think that ice skating goes back to over 4,000 years ago in southern Finland, and the point was to travel more efficiently in winter. In ancient China, it goes back around 3,500 years. In the Song Dynasty, around the year 1000, people started ice skating for recreational purposes. It's written in the History of Song that the emperor admired flowers in the royal garden and leisurely skated on the ice. And amazingly, archaeologists think that the similarities between Chinese and European skates are clear evidence for communication between these cultures in the Bronze Age. So recreational ice skating is really old, but it ramped up in the 1800s, and the popularity of ice skating caused a big increase in the construction of ice rinks. Natural ice rinks are one thing. They happen, naturally, but artificial ice rinks are more interesting, and their history goes back to the 1840s. People didn't want to be limited to ice skating only when and where the conditions were just right. But they didn't have technology to maintain ice, so they invented artificial ice. The ingredients were salt and hog's lard. Some people called this not ice, hyphenated, not dash ice. A skating facility called the Glaciarium opened in 1844 that used this not ice technology, and a local publication wrote, "The area of artificial ice is extremely convenient for such as may be desirous of engaging in the graceful and manly pastime of skating." But the problem was that magical not ice made of salty hog lard was a little bit stinky. So this first version of the Glaciarium didn't last long. But when refrigeration and cooling technologies became available in the 1870s, people went back to work on the idea of making ice rinks available in non-natural places. And in 1876, the world's first mechanically frozen ice rink opened. And now I want to tell you about a true hero of winter sports, Joseph Sampson Gamgee. Gamgee? I don't know. He was a veterinarian who was living and working in London. One of the main things he focused on in his work was diseased meat that was meant for human consumption, like figuring out what was wrong with said meat in terms of animal diseases and stuff like that. He came to the U.S. in the 1870s to study Texas fever in cows, and while he was in the U.S., he learned about refrigeration. At this point, he decided to quit veterinary medicine altogether and switch his focus to refrigeration engineering. And this is what led him to figure out how to mechanically freeze water and keep it frozen. And so he was the one who developed the technology of the new and much improved Glaciarium that opened in 1876. By the way, this work led to the first refrigerated ships. And where would we be without those? Okay, and I don't want to take the bait and go on a tangent about this right now, but I can't not mention that he invented a perpetual motion machine called the Zero Motor. The idea was that it would allow ships to draw energy from the ocean so that they wouldn't need fuel. According to Stephen Humphrey, who wrote an entire book about this, it was the first and last time the U.S. Patent Office granted a patent for a perpetual motion machine. That'll be a whole other episode one day. But for now, back to business. Specifically, the business of the glaciarium. The first version of it was the stinky one from 30 years prior, and this new version was in a small building in Chelsea. It was a concrete base covered with layers of earth, cow hair, and wood, which acted as support for copper pipes, which carried a refrigerant, and these were in a thin layer of water, which froze. And it was a hit. It started as a members-only club for rich people. His target audience was people who would typically go to the Swiss Alps for outdoor skating in winter, so he covered the walls with images of the Swiss Alps, and he installed an orchestra gallery. There were a few other locations and iterations of the glaciarium until 1889, when it closed for financial reasons. But the impact of the glaciarium spread around the world. The first couple in the U.S. were the North Avenue Ice Palace in Baltimore and the Ice Palace in New York, both of which opened in 1894. So things were picking up for ice skating because of this whole new world of artificial ice. But one of the problems with all of this was maintaining the state of the ice. After people have been skating on it for a while, ice gets too messy and too damaged and needs to be resurfaced to reset it. Ice that was used in rinks in the late 1800s, early 1900s was typically only around 3/4 of an inch thick, so it was really easily damaged. And at one ice rink called Iceland, just outside of Los Angeles, resurfacing was a 5-person job that took an hour and a half to finish, and it required a whole lot of tools and special equipment. And this is a big spoiler, but you know who owned Iceland just outside of Los Angeles? The Zamboni family. Before that, the Zamboni family had built an ice-making plant to help with agricultural needs in Southern California, and then when commercial refrigeration became more available, they sold the ice-making plant. But before they sold it, they took out the refrigeration equipment because they had other plans for that. They used it to open Iceland, their ice skating rink. It opened in January 1940, and it was a big success, other than the problem of all the time and effort that went into resurfacing the ice. So a Zamboni brother named Frank Zamboni got to work. By the way, Frank was born in a town called Eureka. So Frank, from Eureka, bought a farm tractor and modified it to become a self-propelled ice resurfacing machine. He did a bunch of adjustments and tests at Iceland until in 1949, he managed to resurface the entire rink in 10 minutes. Smithsonian Magazine points out that in the world of ice sports, it was a maiden voyage on par with that of the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk. And P.S., Frank Zamboni didn't even like to skate. Okay, so that amazing invention by Frank was the Zamboni Model A. I didn't get into learning stuff about how it works, but I did see that overall, more modern iterations of the Zamboni operate under pretty much the same principles as the Model A. But he did want more traction than what he was getting from the Model A, so he built the Model B for that reason. And the Model B has its own cool little story. Model B was essentially Model A, but in Jeep form. In other words, a Jeep with the resurfacing parts of Model A attached to it. When Model B was in operation at Iceland, a Norwegian Olympic figure skater named Sonja Henie was on tour in a traveling ice show. I had never heard of her until researching this, but Vanity Fair called her the original queen of figure skating. She stopped through Iceland to practice while she was on the road, and she fell in love with the Zamboni Model B. She wanted one to take on tour with her, and Frank Zamboni loved the idea. Her next stop was Chicago, so Frank loaded up a trailer with all the resurfacing parts, and he drove a Jeep, carrying that trailer to Chicago, where he got her all set up with her very own road-ready Zamboni Model B. And this was a hugely successful marketing stunt for Zamboni. Sonja Henie continued to travel with it, and then the company bought another for her overseas tour, and that's when the business really took off. And the rest, as you know, is history. Now, Zamboni is the genericized trademark for ice resurfacers, just like how people call bandages Band-Aids and tissues Kleenex. In case you want even more Zamboni information, there's a fun facts section on their website that has 40 fun facts. The best fun fact is a pretty long one, and it's about other Zamboni machines developed by the Zamboni Company. For example, 1. The grasshopper, a machine to roll up artificial turf. 2. The Black Widow, used to fill in dirt on top of cemetery vaults. 3. The Astro Zamboni, designed to vacuum water from AstroTurf. And 4. The Vault Carrier Zamboni, built to lift and carry heavy burial vaults. Speaking of burial vaults, Frank died in 1988 at age 87. Since then, he's been posthumously inducted into the Ice Skating Hall of Fame, the World Figure Skating Hall of Fame, the National Inventors Hall of Fame, the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame, and the U.S. Speed Skating Hall of Fame. And he didn't even like to skate. And neither do I, 'cause it's terrifying, and maybe neither do you. Maybe sledding is more your speed. It's definitely more my speed, and it's really, really old also. The earliest known sleds go back 4,000 years to the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt. And no, they didn't have snow, they used them on sand. And of course, they were used to transport things. They're seen in wall paintings from as far back as 1900 BCE. They were used in snowy parts of the world to transport things as well, but in this episode, I'm talking about fun times and not work times. The first widely recognized time that people used sleds for fun was in Russia in the 1650s. The first time sledding was done as a competitive sport was in St. Moritz, Switzerland in 1898. Supposedly, and I say supposedly because I couldn't find this in an official source anywhere, but I did read it somewhere. Supposedly, what happened in St. Moritz was that there were a bunch of sleds laying around in the resort there to transport goods, because it gets really snowy there in winter. And the people staying at the resort got silly one day and they started to ride the sleds. The staff noticed this, and they decided to build a bobsled track for their guests. By the way, that bobsled track is totally real and still exists, but its origin story is the questionable part. The track itself is called the St. Moritz Celerina Olympic Bob Run, and it's currently the oldest bobsled track in the world and the only one that's naturally refrigerated. St. Moritz, by the way, was first famous for wealthy summer tourists visiting its hot springs, but now it's known best for being the birthplace of alpine winter tourism. The story there is that in 1864, a hotelier made a bet with 4 English tourists. He said that if they came and stayed at his hotel in the winter and didn't like it, he would refund them. Some bet. So they came, and they ended up staying the whole winter, and they told all their friends, and it became the hot new winter destination, largely for skiing. A ton of famous people would winter there, including Alfred Hitchcock, who hung out but never skied. One time when he was there, a member of the press asked him if he planned to ski, and he responded, "I hope not. No, definitely no. I'll watch some skiing, but I just like sitting in my room at the hotel and looking at the snow." I 100% agree, because like ice skating, skiing is also terrifying. I did a bunny slope lesson once, and it was pretty fun, but that one time was enough for me. It just feels so dangerous. Even though, of course, statistically speaking, you're 100 times more likely to die canoeing than skiing. It's still too scary. And sometimes people even die on ski lifts. Occasionally, the chairs just fall off the cable, and occasionally riders just fall out of the chairs. But ski lifts are overall quite safe, and it's one of those things where they rarely malfunction or have problems, but when they do, it's big news. According to the National Ski Areas Association in 2019, a passenger is 5 times more likely to suffer a fatality riding an elevator than a ski lift, and more than 8 times more likely to suffer a fatality riding in a car than on a ski lift. Whether or not you think they're scary, you have to at least recognize the huge impact they had on skiing. Before ski lifts were invented, only real-deal mountaineers could really pursue downhill skiing because you'd have to climb a mountain in order to ski down one. The world's first overhead cable tow for skiers was invented by a German innkeeper with the most perfect name of Robert Winterhalter, I guess, in 1906. In this first version, skiers would hook onto a continuously moving cable above their heads, and then they would get pulled uphill on their skis. So that was in Germany, but what about in the US? In general, the US was, not too surprisingly, very much behind Europe in ski technology. The first ski area in the US didn't open until 1915. It was in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And then around 20 others opened up in different cold parts of the country, and they were all pretty much the same. Just basic areas where people would come and ski, until the Sun Valley Resort opened in 1936 in Ketchum, Idaho. It was all-inclusive. There was a ski lodge with overnight stays available, fine dining, ski lessons, and they marketed themselves nationwide. Weirdly, this resort was opened by the Union Pacific Railroad. They were trying to get people to take trains more, and they had been inspired by European ski resorts. Furthermore, they had the world's first chairlifts. This was because Union Pacific engineers recognized that the biggest hurdle to getting a ton of people to go to a ski resort was getting them up the mountain in the first place. They wanted regular old rich people to be able to do this easily and not have to be professional mountain climbers or mega athletic to try it out. The guy in charge of the railroad had officially challenged all of the engineers to come up with a solution to this problem, and James Curran, who was a bridge engineer at the time, had a flash of inspiration. He was inspired by banana conveyor belts. They're exactly what they sound like, so whatever you're picturing, probably pretty accurate. He said, I wonder, if they can do that with bananas, why can't we hook a chair to a conveyor belt and get people up the mountain that way? So he did some work and wrote a proposal for his idea. He showed it to his boss, who literally just laughed at him, but then he cartoonishly snuck it into a pile of proposals under review by other developers, and he got okayed to move forward with his banana conveyor belt ski lift idea. Fast forward through a bunch of trials and tests and prototypes, and Curran invented the first chairlift, aka the human banana conveyor belt. The original version didn't slow down for pickup or drop-off, so you had to hustle to get on or off. Chairs were 20 feet off the ground, and skiers were transported 3,540 feet with a gain of around 1,100 feet in elevation along the way on one of the slopes. They also put blankets on every seat because the ride took a while. There were designated employees who folded the blankets at the top and sent them back to the bottom, and they were paid with skiing privileges. What a life. And even now, even though the specifics have been improved upon a lot, the basic technology is the same. James Curran died in 1968 and never profited from his invention because the railroad company owned the patent. But in 2001, he was inducted into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame. And my favorite part, other than the banana part, is that James Curran never skied. Not even once, not even after he invented the chairlift. Maybe because, like I said, it's scary. And to me, one of the scariest things about being out there in the snow is the possibility of an avalanche. I'm not going to talk about avalanches in general because that's another whole awful episode unto itself. But I do want to give you some tips in case you end up buried in snow sometime this winter. Just in case, but also because the tips are pretty interesting to me. Okay, here we go. Tips for if you get buried in an avalanche. Number 1, stick your arm out above your head and maybe it'll be visible to rescuers. Number 2, spit and see which way it goes because that direction is down. Or if you can see your breath, notice which way your breath rises. That is up. If you can see light, that's also obviously up. Number 3, dig an air hole around your face. Number 4, if you know you're close to the surface, dig, but if not, conserve your oxygen and wait for rescuers if you think they're searching. And number 5, pee. Rescue dogs have a better chance of locating you if they smell urine. And now that I've set you up for success during both cocktail parties and avalanches this winter, this is where I'll leave you. Until season 2 in the spring, stay curious and don't be scared of chairlifts. But more importantly, don't be scared to just watch other people ski from the warmth of your hotel room. This theme song was written and recorded by Clark Blomquist. Hey, how did the man feel after being buried under the avalanche? A bit under the weather.